Hi, everybody. Welcome to Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money. This is Gabrielle Clemens. Thanks for stopping by today. I really appreciate that you're tuning in. I want to talk today about something that has been coming across my desk, and I think it's very timely. And it's about home ownership and property ownership post-divorce. Now, we heard a few sessions back from Katie Greeley, who is a certified mortgage professional, and she certainly went through a lot of the opportunities and issues related to qualifying for a mortgage after divorce and trying to get become eligible and secure lending during and after the divorce process. As a result of interest rates being high right now, relatively high, I mean, certainly in the 1980s, they were much higher than they are today, but we're accustomed to lower rates. And over the last few years, rates have been as low as 2% and 3%. And a lot of people refinanced, which was a very smart financial decision to make, getting out of a higher rate mortgage, especially if it's a 30-year fixed mortgage, and refinancing into a lower rate mortgage, typically, like I said, 3 or 4%. And you can't beat that. So fast forward now to the present, and we have people now who are getting divorced, and they are loath to leave those low rate mortgages because they have to refinance in order to remove a spouse from the deed and from the mortgage itself. So now we're facing a situation where you have to refinance into a higher rate mortgage, which is going to, of course, increase the amount that you're spending on interest and on having a bad impact on or a negative impact on your monthly mortgage payment. Taxes, real estate taxes are going up. Insurance as a result, depending on where you live, as a result of hurricanes and earthquakes and fires and everything that we're facing environmentally these days. You are going to also face a higher home insurance rate. So taxes are going up, property taxes are going up, insurance rates are going up, and now you're getting into a higher rate mortgage payment. So this is not this is a trifecta that is not resulting in a positive cash flow and putting a lot of strain on people who are trying to get divorced because their support payments are significantly higher than they would be in another low rate environment. So what do? Well, I had a woman in my office yesterday, and she said, well, my husband and I discussed it, and we're just going to co-own the marital home and a couple of other properties that we own. We're going to own them together and see how that goes. I don't know, Patrice, what are your thoughts? Just off the top of your head, does this sound like a good idea?
I'm listening to you, and it is today. I mean, interest rates were wonderfully low a couple of years ago, and now you're looking at what, 6-7%, right?
Exactly.
It's going to be considerably a negative impact. But co-owning with your ex, I don't think that sounds like such a great idea.
It is not a great idea. It's a great idea on paper, but it's not a great idea for your peace of mind and for your positive mental outlook, because it's very difficult. If we think about it, a divorce is an attempt to extricate and separate yourself from this person.
Exactly.
Financially, I have the same client who was in my office. She was saying that she wanted an alimony buyout, which is getting a lump sum payment for your alimony instead of getting a monthly payment for the next 5, 10, 15 years, whatever you're entitled to. So we're going to calculate that. But for the same reason and in the same breath, she said, oh, well, and we're also going to co-own the property.
But so when you co-own the property, you still have all the responsibilities, don't you?
Well,
co-responsibilities?
Well, and that's a good question, and we're going to get to that. So there are absolutely some benefits to co-owning if it can work. If it's a commercial property, if it's a property that, is owned perhaps by a limited liability company, which is an LLC, and you have some separation between you and the management of the property. Again, if you have someone else who is a property manager and you're just sitting back, collecting checks, that could be a great way to avoid having to refinance and have a higher rate of mortgage or higher mortgage payment.
And I can see that working, but it's very much, that is definitely a business situation.
Correct. Exactly. If it's a business situation, it makes perfect sense. So let's unpack this a little bit. So what are your options? Right now, if you're going to own this property for the next year or two, so if you're just trying to, own, let's say just take your marital home. If you're just going to own the marital home for the next year or two until your child graduates from high school, this could be a very limited time where this arrangement could work. So you're in the marital home, spouse moves out, you agree to take on the responsibility of managing the house, just for the purpose of keeping the property for the next year or two until your child graduates college. That absolutely could work. And the way that can work is the person who's staying in the home typically operates and acts like a renter. All right. They're paying for the electricity. They're paying for the gas. They're paying for the internet, the streaming services, everything related to the home. If you have someone who is coming in and cleaning the home, anything related on a month-to-month living situation, as if you were as if you were a renter, that's what the person in the home who's occupying the home would pay. Sometimes that extends to having the lawn mowed by a service. You would pay for that. So anything related to maintenance of the home, that would not be a cost incurred by the person who's living there, right? Patrice, you wouldn't expect a renter to pay for plumbing or pay for a home to be repainted or a home to have any maintenance being paid for by the renter. Would you? Would you expect that?
No, but then I wouldn't necessarily view the person staying in the home as a renter either, because the person owning it, or the two people owning it, they still have the equity in it. So as a quote unquote renter, you still have equity in the house. You want to maintain it. And the other person, the ex, would also want to maintain it, because in the end, you want to sell it, don't you?
Exactly. And that's the plan. So in your divorce agreement, you would want to make sure you're very clear that if one spouse doesn't buy out the other spouse of the equity within, say, 24 months, then you are going to have the home sold. And if you're going to co-own it until that time, then you want to make sure that you have precisely stated in your agreement who is going to pay for what. And what that typically looks like is, we would say, let's say the person who's residing in the home will take on the responsibilities as a renter would. And we all know what that means. Many of us have rented properties in the past, and you can further detail what you mean by that phrase, as a renter would. This is what we typically put into an agreement. We say the person occupying the home will pay for the electricity, the gas, the monthly bills related to occupancy and occupying the home. It specifically excludes property insurance, real estate taxes, and mortgage payments. Okay. Those larger expenses, the taxes, the insurance, and the mortgage payment, would be the ultimate responsibility of the owners of the property, who just happen to be this divorcing couple. So what that means is you would have a pool of money, perhaps a separate account that is opened at a local bank, and the owners of the property, the divorced couple now, would put money into an account to pay for minor expenses. Anything over $500, or it could be $250. It depends, whatever expense level you are comfortable with. Anything over that would have to be approved by both parties, and the expense could be taken out of that joint bank account that would put some money aside from maybe the marital assets in order to fund anything major that has to be put into the property over the next 2 years. There would have to be an agreement as to what those expenses are. So let's say the heater goes. Okay, let's see, the water heater breaks down and you have to pay $10,000 for a new water heater. That's something that both parties would have to agree to. The money comes out of this joint account, and the maintenance, the repairs are then taken. The person who's in the home now is going to feel as though, well, I'm managing all of this. Why do I have to pay 50%? Some people get a little management fee if it's a complicated situation. But again, you're exactly right, Patrice. Both parties have an interest in keeping this home maintained, keeping this home up to snuff, and in good shape, because we know from the agreement in 24 months, in 2 years, in the spring market, this house is going on the market and it's going to be sold. So this can work for probably 2 years, but it cannot work long term. So for vacation homes, this becomes a little bit more complicated. And why do you think, Patrice? What's going to happen to a vacation home if you plan to own it with your spouse or your ex-spouse for 5 years? What do you think is going to happen?
Who is going to use it and when?
Exactly.
That comes to mind.
You're exactly right. And not only who, but who is going to be with that person when they're using it. Now you get into very complicated situations because think ahead 5 years. You may have a new person in your life. Your spouse may have a new person in their lives. What is it going to look like, and how are you going to feel if you get to your joint vacation property and you see someone else's clothes hanging in the closet, or somebody else's,
decorating somebody else's furniture, maybe they
exactly somebody else's food in the refrigerator that they thought you would enjoy and you don't enjoy, and just leftover stuff that becomes psychologically just too much to handle, especially if this is your vacation and you walk in expecting to see nothing and only your belongings or your former spouse's belongings. And then you have a third party who is encroached upon your mental health, living rent-free in your head for the week or 2 weeks that you are supposedly enjoying the property.
And face it, this is not something you're going to forget. Your vacation time will be up and you go back home, and this is going to stay in your mind.
Exactly. And what if you get to the home and there are stains on your couch, or the chair is ripped or misplaced or moved to an area of the house that you weren't expecting. So this becomes a problem. But I understand how people may be enticed or, would want to do this because they can't refinance the home for a reasonable amount and they don't want to sell it. Another matter that comes up, they say, well, what if we own it and we put it into trust for the kids? Now, that becomes an issue only because we don't know how long it's going to be in trust. We don't know who's going to pay for this unless you have a separate trust or a separate account that is going to produce income and support the property so that for the benefit of the children, because depending on the age of the children, this could be many years. And if you do that, it also could hinder you ultimately selling it in case you don't, things change. Maybe you don't like your children's spouses and you don't want to give them the property anymore. This could become a problem with future ownership and future maintenance of the property. So there are some ways that you can do this. And in the short run, if it's 24 months or less, sure, I think you could work it out, but you would definitely want to have some kind of deadline that either one of us is going to buy one another out, within the 24 months. And it could be any time within the 24 months. Maybe someone wins the lottery and all of a sudden they can afford to buy out the other spouse from any of these properties, whether it's the marital home or a vacation home or rental property. But if you come into money and you're comfortable, rates come down to a reasonable amount and you can refinance, that's great. You can do that within 24 months or ask your spouse for an extension. But if it's for any time period longer than 24 months, you really want to think of either making that change now and just, plan to refinance on your own in the future. If you are working right now and you want to be sure that you are going to be eligible to get your own mortgage, you want to do that sooner rather than later. But if you plan to retire, you don't have an income, a proper income from a job, it's going to be hard to become eligible and qualify for a mortgage. So you have to keep that in mind.
What have you seen with people staying in the marital home, the stress that's involved there? And is it harder to stay in the marital home than it would be to leave?
Well, people feel very closely tied, and their identity is tied with their marital home. Mm-hmm. They love their neighbors. They've been there for 25 years, and they feel very safe and secure, and they know the home, and they feel as though it's their right to stay in the home. If you can buy out your spouse, if you can afford to do that, and you can afford to maintain and keep the marital home and you have the cash flow to do that, sure, you can do that. There are some concerns that if you've owned the home for 25 years, you likely have a capital gain that exceeds the exemption amount of $250,000. So if you sell it with your spouse, you have an exemption amount of $500,000, and you and your spouse will share in the expense of selling the home. You will share the realtor fees, you will share the fix-up costs, you will share all of the fees associated with selling a jointly owned property. You'll share that with your spouse. If you choose to continue to own the home just for yourself, and you have your spouse removed from the deed, and if you still have a mortgage and you refinance, you are going to end up owning this property potentially at a higher mortgage rate, certainly higher taxes and higher interest and higher insurance as time goes on. And then when you go to sell, you're going to lose their $250,000 exemption. And if you're going to sell the home within 24 months, I would just say sell it now. I would say sell it now. But again, if you need to own the home for another 2 years or so because your child wants to stay and wants some stability as they graduate high school, fine. One decision I see that, and I just talked to a client about this last week. She said, my first mistake was selling my home and buying another home in the same town. It was an expensive town because I thought my kids would want to come home on their college break and come back to the same town and be with their friends. Oh. Now, I was doubtful at the time, and I'm always doubtful because, it's expensive to stay in the same family town, especially if you don't have children in the school system anymore, and you don't need to be in an expensive town. You can buy in the next town over and be just as happy, and your children can cross city lines to get back to see their friends. But this woman went into debt to stay in the town, and she ended up selling her home for less than what she paid for it. Eventually, 4 years later, when her kids stopped coming home, they had gone through college. They had jobs outside of the city, outside of the state, and she didn't think it was necessary in the end to have bought that property when she could have bought a cheaper property in a lesser town because she didn't have kids in the school system. So she ultimately did sell that property and she did suffer a loss. But making decisions because you think that the kids are going to come home every college break and be with their friends, to think that they need to be in the same town, I think that's a mistake. I don't think you need to do that. But it's people have to learn, and people have to make the decisions that are right for themselves at the time. This woman, I think, felt very guilty about the divorce, and she wanted to keep things as stable for the kids as possible. But ultimately, Patrice, the kids want to see that you're happy, that you're comfortable, that you're moving on in your life, and it's all about the leadership. If you're happy and your kids can see that you're happy, they're going to be happy too. It's not as much about being in the home, but if you take a house and make it a home, and you can laugh and celebrate holidays with your kids, they don't care what town you're in. Honestly, it's really true. They want to see that you're happy.
When it comes to a couple making this decision, do you see the woman taking the lead on it more than the man, or vice versa?
Which decision? The home?
To sell or not to sell the home?
Well, typically women, because many of them are homemakers, and it's in our DNA to, take a house and make it a home. I do see it's typically a woman. It's typically a woman over the age of 50 who has been a stay-at-home mom. And we've stay-at-home dads now. I have a lot of clients who are stay-at-home dads, and they're facing the same situation. They're home. Maybe they work from home. That's a dynamic that has changed. They have their office set up. The kids have their rooms, and everybody wants to stay put. But somebody has to move. Somebody has to leave. And for some people, man or woman, it doesn't seem to make a difference. Some people see this as a really positive step to start a new life, to move to a different place, to have new surroundings, paint the walls the way they want it decorated, or the color that they want, have the kids pick out their rooms, get them new bedding, and sort of start all over and in a new space, and sort of, mark this as their territory, and they're going to do it their way this time. And that's a really positive attitude towards selling the home and starting new somewhere else, or leaving the marital home and allowing your former spouse to be there. But to get back to co-owning, I just wanted to wrap this up with understanding, how this could work and what it's going to look like. So you'll both stay on the deed, and you're both going to stay on the mortgage. There are financial benefits to doing this. Again, if you're doing it for a limited period of time, you would split all the costs, except the person who is living in the home would pay the monthly electric bills, all the utilities, maybe the water bill, and maybe some maintenance expenses up to $100. Anything over $250, $500, that is pertaining to the structure or the integrity of the house, such as plumbing, if there's a leak, if the roof needs to be patched or replaced. Obviously, that's a big expense, and that would come out of the joint account of the house, or the house account. For many clients, we call it the house account. Or if only one spouse has the funds for it at this point, they could front the money. They could pay the $10,000, $20,000 for the new roof, and then be reimbursed from off the top of the proceeds when the house is sold in 2 years. So they would be reimbursed right off the top because they're funding the expenses. Again, it keeps the kids in the home for a limited period of time as you're waiting for them to graduate. You would have joint liability for any expense over $250, $500. That's, we've discussed that. But you really have to have a separate agreement, or an agreement that is part of the divorce agreement as to how this is going to be managed. What are we going to do in the event that there is a dispute? So if it is in the case of a vacation home, the house is to be, used every other weekend, every week, for the month of for the month of July, the month of August, by one person or the other person. This is what can be done. This is what cannot be done. You cannot rearrange. You cannot redecorate. And there are Dishes are not to be left in the dishwasher. Clothing and towels and sheets will all be replaced at the end of every stay. This is who's going to be cleaning the house and how those expenses are going to be shared. And you're not going to have towels and sheets in the washing machine or in the dryer as, upon leaving the home. So if this is something that you feel compelled to do, you have to have a very clear and concrete co-ownership agreement and also a dispute resolution clause. So anything around this home ownership, this co-home ownership, if there is something that is just, there's a escalated dispute over, we're going to go to mediation. If you used a mediator for your agreement, your divorce agreement, you can go back to that mediator. You can go to a different mediator, but always have an exit strategy and say, if this persists, we're going to sell the home. We're going to revisit this arrangement every year. And we're going to have the option to sell the home. And this is, how we're going to handle it. So I'm not in love with this situation. I like co-ownership for only 2 years, but anything beyond that, make sure if you have to do it, if this is a legacy property and you don't want to sell it now and you can't refinance it because it would be too expensive, then please, make sure that you have a very concrete agreement. It can also be a separate agreement outside of your divorce agreement, and your divorce agreement can reference this outside agreement. But if this is going to be a protracted co-ownership proposition, please think it through. Make sure you have everything in writing. Make sure you have a meeting of the minds as to how this arrangement is going to work, and make sure you have a dispute resolution clause. How are you going to resolve any prolonged dispute, and an exit strategy. We'll do this for as long as we're going to do this, but worst case, we're going to sell the home and it's going on the market the year after, or whatever works for you. But I wanted to share that today because as things come across my desk and as people walk in a high interest rate environment, this is what we're facing. This is topical today. So if you're listening and it's May of 2025, good luck. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can find me at www.gabrielleclemens.com. You can always reference my book, Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money. It's available on Amazon, and or you can always call me on my cell, 781-910-4770. Patrice, any questions?
My only, no question, but I think you wrapped it up when you said, get it in writing.
Get it in writing.
Yep.
Very true. All right. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. Please reach out if you have any questions. Visit my website, buy the book, and best of luck.
Thank you for listening to Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money podcast with Gabrielle Clemens. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, or to get a copy of Gabrielle's book, Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money, head over to www.gabrielleclemens.com. And don't forget to check out the show notes for additional contact information.